All right, so this is part two. So time is a little short this morning, but I think we can cover it. Just a little bit of review, because this is part two. In part one, we talked about the context of the scriptures. We generally think about things like what were people like, and what did they believe back then, and who wrote it, to whom was it written, how does it fit other scripture. We need to be careful not to proof text, but not just look at this specific phrase, but back up and look at paragraph, chapter, and even book. And it should be confirmed by other scriptures. And all this is very true, but how does it fit my context? How does it fit me in my life, in what I do following Jesus? And we need to understand that we're not the center of the universe. Now, the truth of the matter is, my universe revolves around me, and your universe revolves around you. But we need to understand and think that that's not, everybody doesn't think like I do. Everybody's not, got the same histories I do. So we need to understand that we're not the center of the universe, and we need to be aware of our influences in the world. So if we don't admit that we have a historically situated context, and we somehow think that our beliefs around the world are universal, then we're blindly accepting those influences, and we call that, a couple of weeks ago, bias. This is the outline. So I wrote this up here. I actually added an additional one because the transitional time between modernity and post-modernity is really where we are. So I thought we should add that as well. We're going to talk about that in more detail kind of as we get to the end. And then we talked about the dawning of the Dark Age. And as we were approaching this Dark Age was like the late church times, and really when the church was convoluted because Constantine took over, and we picked up things from Romans that still exist with us today. Sometimes like organization, super organized, super formality, nominalism. All I have to do is say, everybody's a Christian, so it's easy for me to say I'm a Christian. And materialism. And that means accepting people who are rich at the cost of the people who are poor, pushing them to the sidelines. Now, Christendom has two parts. It has the ecclesiastical structure, which is the church, the spiritual side, popes who had archbishops and bishops and priests and so forth, and the practical side, which was the emperor of Rome. And that's the way it was divided. That's what we call Christendom in early times and as we went forward. So Florence was the rise of the Republic for the middle class. Petrarch was a resurgence of classical literature, and Erasmus was the rolling of religious reforms. And we said that it's not these particular people, but these are representative of the people of their time that brought on this change and this transition from the Dark Ages to modernity. And by the way, I don't have it up here, but Petrarch was the one who said all those people back then were ignorant, and he's the one that gave them the name Dark Ages. So the result was the modern period, which extends from about 1500 to sometime in the 20th century. We said, and kind of getting into new material now, we said that the Second World War is often a convenient place to draw the line between modernism and postmodernism, and that's kind of the way we grew up. Especially in the South, this modernistic mindset. And we're having trouble even letting go. So we can talk about transition to a postmodern world all we want, but we're still deeply embedded in rationalism or in modern mindset, which is rationalism and reasoning, and that's where we're going today. So it's very much a part of our lives. So we, just like Petrarch and Erasmus was a part of this transition time, today we're a part of the transition time between modernism and post-modernism. So there are two important movements within modernity. In the 1600s you had the Age of Reason. In the 1700s you had the Age of Enlightenment. And clearly neither one of these had the Age of Humility with their name and their thought and their mindset. So this tells us a lot about the modern period. It's a time when reason began to take the throne from the church. As a foundation of knowledge, and this newfound emphasis on religion, it led to immense scientific discoveries. The scientific revolution, the political revolution, and the general feeling of superiority and enlightenment which lasted until at least the middle of the 20th century. So there was a lot of talk about progress and utopia and enlightenment. So this importance of the mindset credited to Rene Descartes. He was a mathematician and a philosopher. He was a father of modern philosophy, and he was clearly a genius who made significant contributions to our understanding of math, science, and philosophy. Remember, the Dark Ages were marked by a clear chain of being. You had boom, boom, boom. People up here and people tell down here what to do and how to live, with hierarchies and monarchies, and they were a well-established structure given to them from God, because the Pope and his bishops and archbishops, and they knew the truth and they just passed it down. And that's the way it was back then. Now, while there was plenty wrong with this system, it at least did provide a certain level of stability and safety. So, but then as Renaissance swept through, they were revisiting the Greek and Roman thinkers and so forth, and things began to get a little bit unsettled. And of course, a huge revolution happened in 1517 in the decades to follow, with Martin Luther beginning the Protestant Reformation. And he really didn't intend to start with the Reformation, but just looking at the Catholic Church and letting them know what they were doing wrong and they needed to change. But that didn't work, and so it went into a Reformation. So from our perspective, we might see the political and religious hierarchies breaking down. Liberation. This is good news. It's something to be celebrated, which in many ways it was. But it was also a very volatile and scary time. There's a lot of violence and casualties in this time. And without this hierarchical structure and the clarity of chain of command, how's everything going to fall in place? And how can it be not so confusing? So what will place these clear lines of authority is not this top-down Christendom of the state with the clear hierarchies and one universal Catholic Church with all that structure and bureaucracy. What was going to replace or unify us so that we were not ending up with chaos and anarchy? What grounds our ability to communicate and talk to others is this God-ordained. If we didn't have this God-ordained government in church, the modern answer became very clear over the next 100 years, and that was reason. So reason takes place in the church as the primary authority in the West in an uneasy way. The church is there, but the church, and it's still in charge, but reason slowly over the decades began to take place in the primary authority. Let me just stop here and say, in your workplace, when you have problems, how do you figure it out? Reasoning. And so applying that to Scripture, is that good? Well, we'll talk about that later on, but yes and no. So primarily, yes. And maybe I'm too modernistic myself, maybe, but still understanding and logic and thinking about where we're going. Yes, Warren.
Well, I'm a lot of times very critical of the Enlightenment and other thinkers like Descartes all the way to John Locke, but it's easy to forget what they were addressing, and that was a radical extreme from their position, which was this irrational, superstitious, where a lot of stuff got stuck into Christianity, and they were trying to eradicate it.
So why did all this superstition and stuff get put in? Because people at the time were generally what? Illiterate, ignorant. And you had people who really took advantage of their authority, and I'm telling you what God says, they took advantage of that. And so that's what brought us, the extremism of the way they did things, that brought us into this, hey, let's get rid of this and have a more rationalistic, reasoning thinking.
But as you're talking about that, people generally speaking were religious. At the time of Martin Luther, they were very religious. They really did want to buy indulgences. They really did want to pray somebody out of purgatory. They had these misconceptions that were injected into their brain as truth because of the Catholic Church. And during that age of reason and the age of enlightenment, what you see is not just that people were beginning to think, well, if Luther is right and we're saved by faith instead of by all of our works, then, they start taking that to the next step, which all of those sort of, let's reason our way through this. Let's do away with all the structure that we have in the Catholic Church. It began to sort of bleed over into how we dealt with our government and those very same things that Luther was talking about, and the freedom and the structure that we've created, which is total fiction. You know, it led to the American Revolution.
Yep.
It led to the English, Revolution, the French Revolution. All those things occurred because of the writings of these people, sort of not necessarily projecting and intending for people to take that to politics or the way governments are run, but it was just the next step.
That's right.
Let's let go of this religiously, then we can let go of all these kings and queens. Why does this person deserve to be the king? So it led to what we now saw as Parliament in England. I mean, they had a more peaceful revolution, but the same things are going on, not just in that, but also in science, that there were all these preconceived ideas about diseases and where they came from, and all that was stuff. Hey, let's let go of these stupid things that we think and come to reason our way through, which led to ultimately the humanism that we see surrounding
And
us
there's
today.
several slides I've got that says a lot of what you said, but when you originally said it, I want to back up because that's not in here. So they were religious people, they believed all this stuff. Why did they believe all this stuff? Because that was the center of their universe, where they were then. That's all that had ever been taught, and furthermore, they were illiterate. And so that's the reason it happened. So this going to this state of reason had some positive things to it. So,
But we've done this, but while they were illiterate, which means they couldn't read, and nor did they think they really needed to read, we've kind of essentially done the same thing in our own religious backgrounds today, where we have people that hardcore believe certain things that they've never individually investigated and concluded, but they're absorbing you have to be baptized to go to heaven. Well, how do you know that? Well, I might be able to, or anybody in this room might be able to sit down with a Bible and without being prompted, tell you why you believe that. But there's a lot of people who believe lots of things that surround us today that believe it because somebody stood in the pulpit and told them that. And then just like people in the 1500s believed what the Pope said, we believe what somebody else tells us too, which is, this is what you're supposed to believe. And it is a source of criticism, especially amongst our people who've always found book, chapter, and verse kind of mentality, and we don't know book, chapter, and verse like we used to.
that's right. So about 80 years later, after Luther, we get Descartes. And Rene Descartes started looking at this human-centered reason takeover, and he says, I'm going to doubt everything I can possibly doubt. He began to think about the foundation of certainty. Let's just make absolutely sure that I know what I'm talking about. And I'm going to use reason, and I'm going to use logic, I'm going to use our ability to think. And all these are good things, once again, if not taken to extreme. And so he had 4 points. He says, never accept anything for true, which I did not clearly know such to be. And so if it didn't pass that test, I didn't go any further, because if I've got to absolutely know that it's true before I can go further. And then he would take what he had left and divide it and examine it in as many parts as possible. He'd kind of just break it down. And that's what we call analysis. And then the third one was he would take the object and rank them from simplest to the easiest, so that I can start with the easy and move my way to the simple. And we call that, at least in the manufacturing world today, it's written up there, it's a Pareto. A Pareto is just sorting it and from biggest to smallest, and I'm going to work on the biggest things first and move on down. And then make every enumeration complete so that I can be assured that nothing was omitted. And that's a screen that shows all 4 of them in the same screen. So what was his conclusion? He doubts everything. But the one thing that he finds he cannot doubt is that he exists. I can't doubt that. I do exist. And that's where we get this famous phrase, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I can't doubt that I am, because if I doubted that I am, then who would be thinking the thought that I doubt that I am? And so that's the only thing that I can absolutely be sure of. It would have to be something. What is that thing? Is that thing called me? From there he begins to build on his project, and he rises, and this is the rise of his subject. People start with thinking things have to start. So reason became the tool and grounded by which anything can be true or false. It was the standard, and from that we get another R word, rationalism. Rationalism is the belief that reason should be the primary source of knowledge. It's how we test our knowledge. Reason takes not just from the divine authority, but from tradition. It democratizes our thinking. It's no longer just the elite and special divine knowledge that can hold the truth, but most human minds are capable of reasoning if done the right way. And we just have to figure out what is the right way. We'll make assumption about reason that it's universal. That if we just applied the correct method, and when I say applied the correct method, now think about this is the Protestant age, and so what really kind of sprouted from this thought in a denominational world today? Methodism taught that thought. If we just have the right method. And so that was really the springing of that. Reason takes not just from the divine authority, but from tradition. And it democratizes our thinking. So these two foundations of modernity, freedom and reason, as one thinker at a time. Immanuel Kant said in his essay, What is Enlightenment? He says this, look at that. Immaturity is the inability to use one's own understanding without the guidance of another. That make sense? I'm not gonna think through, you just tell me what to do. And that means I am immature. And I would say.
Could be the opposite too, though.
Yeah.
Could be that you're trusting your own self so much that you don't use the guidance of others. You know,
Okay. All right.
That's immature. Think about teenagers.
Okay. But I would say that's arrogance and really not learning as much as I can, because we can learn through synergism. We can learn with multiple people putting their thoughts together and growing.
And that's how you, I mean, you can get different schools of thought. I mean, you look at how we are as Church of Christ versus Methodist. Hey, this is what we're going to follow. I mean, this is because somebody back years ago decided, like Jacob Almond split off for the Amish from the Mennonites. And
Right.
We're gonna practice shunning. You know, we're not gonna be all together. If they're not leading us right, we're gonna get away from them.
Well,
You know, so I think that's kind of the same thing. If you have somebody that says this is the way it is, you know, there was people like even with the apostles. They followed one apostle, you know, and we go around with them. They got to thinking how they thought, and this is what it is, you know.
yeah.
So
And there are good things,
Yeah.
but we need to make sure that we're thinking, we're digging,
Right.
we're understanding Scripture, and don't just be fed something by anybody just because. Make sure that what you're saying is true. Tony?
Versions of the Bible.
Yep.
There are people that if it's not King James,
Yep.
they won't be.
Absolutely. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So one effect of this new confidence and reason was the traditional authorities were increasingly questioned. So as I come to this reason, as I come to this thinking, wow, is that a good thing? I think yes, it is. Until we go overboard in that thinking. Excuse me. Why should we need a political or religious authorities to tell us how to live our lives or what to believe if each of us has the capacity to figure those things out for ourselves? Kant, coming at the end of the Enlightenment period, he's right in the middle of the modern mindset. He's a firm believer in the ultimacy of reason. And he says in his famous critique of pure reason, our age is the age of criticism, to which everything must submit. Religion through its holiness and legislation through its majesty, commonly seek to exempt themselves from it. We're in the age of criticism. The very first class I said, we need to be critical thinkers. And I stand by that. We need to be critical thinkers. So Newton had the reason to further science. Locke used reason to further democracy or political reform. Kant used it to further religion and morality and to rip it from superstition and unwanted church authority. So, with Newton, science, Newton was to science, as Locke was to democracy, as Kant was to religion and morality. So, now we're moving toward postmodernism, and you can read those 8, and I started to try to explain them to you, but let's just say, I mean, we've just essentially summed it all up, and that may not totally be true, but to a large effect it is. Postmodernism says there's no such thing as absolute truth. And we laugh at that, and we scored at that, and there is things that's absolute truth, but at the same time, we need to think about and dig and make sure that what we believe and what we teach is true. And it's not just handed down. So as we look at these philosophies, Dark Ages, the intellectual leaders of the church just feeds the followers all they need. We have the answers. You listen. And modernity, the freedom from being told what to do. And we can find and know the answer. And post-modernity is there's no such thing as absolute truth. Which one is the correct one?
It's a mix. There's not one.
Exactly right answer. There's not one.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead. I think there's a lot of dangerous things going on with postmodernism and deconstruction.
Yeah.
But there's some really important things that
Think so.
they get, and that is, you know, Jacques Derrida in '68 pointed the flaws of language, and that the arbitrariness of it, and the flaws in the building blocks of structuralism or British analytic philosophy, or especially Descartes and Kant and all those guys. And the problem, though, is, and they were on the fringe up until a few years ago. Now that they've captured our systems of academia, of increasingly theology in the main seminaries, it's a really horrible situation that they've taken over, because there's not anything to build them. In fact, a lot of liberals don't like Derrida because he doesn't allow anything to be built. And then you got people like Foucault, who is the source of all this DEI and critical race theory, that it's not about, truth is a mirage, it's all about power. And so that's what's happening in our society, and it's starting to, and it's finding its way into churches. At first it was, very, I guess you could call leftist churches, very liberal churches, but it's that kind of thinking your kids are being taught this. Mm-hmm. In Murray County, Tennessee, because the teachers went to schools of education where this stuff informs everything that's being taught. It's very subtle, but when they come to church, they're going to be that way of thinking about the nature of truth and the nature of force and the hierarchy and all that stuff is going to start seeping its way in, and is seeping its way into.
Yeah, okay, those are good points.
But that clear division, though, of physics and metaphysics, that, you have, metaphysics has no truth. Things like, is it wrong to lie? It's like, I don't know. You could say it's okay to lie when you need to. I mean, situation ethics certainly tells us that, under the right circumstances, it's okay to lie. Under the right circumstances, it's okay to have an abortion. Under the right circumstances, these things become true or not true based on things that we assign. Whereas very few people would say that, building a skyscraper, that we should, I don't know, should this support that or not support that? It's like, well, there's a right answer here. We accept the fact that there's truth. And, I think when Jesus You know, and that's what's so special about this statement, when Jesus said, I am the truth.
Yeah.
You know, is there a God? It's like, well, I don't know. It's like, I don't really care what you think. It doesn't change reality
There are
that,
definitely
you know,
some
gravity
absolute
is here. You know, do I understand gravity? No, I don't understand gravity, but I know it's not a matter of somebody's opinion. But there are things, like, is it wrong to kill somebody? Well, you know, there is a right answer to that question. You know, is it okay to lie? There is an answer to that question. It's only when we begin to inject into
Yeah.
that we finally have to come to, well, the only thing I know for sure is that I am.
Yeah.
You know.
So I had a math teacher that says, do you believe in electricity? I said, yeah, please explain it. I can't explain it. Let's go turn the switch on. I know it happens. So there are things that happen that we know, but we aren't always able to understand. But when we look at these three philosophies, this Dark Ages, modernity, and post-modernity, and Fabian correctly said there is no right answer, because when we look at this, we have a pendulum, and we're always moving from one to the other, and we really never come to the center. So there are things about Dark Ages that were good. There were things about having leaders that were helping direct, and that's what corrupt over time. There are things about reason, unless just logically think and come up with the answer. The problem is you can't come up with the answer about everything. There's something good about this post-modernity that says that test things, understand things, you know. So there's good thoughts to all of these. So this is the rule book and wisdom type thing that we looked at. James 3 says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by their good life, by the deeds done in humility. That comes from wisdom. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first pure and peaceful, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. So we talked about mystery. There is such a thing as mystery, especially and God is mystery, especially if you define mystery as, I can't know everything there is to know about God. Or, what I think I know about God, I'm not certain about. Because there is still mystery there, and we need to understand that. And I've gone over that before. This is comparing modernism and postmodernism together. Modernism is invest in results. Postmodernism is subjective. It omits results. Modernism already arrived. I'm continually improving the process. So there are good things about that. So when we say postmodernism omits the results, faith is about this world. This is also the focus of the lives and writers of the Bible. Jesus said almost nothing about what happens to us when we die, or how to tell people how to get to heaven when they die. He says much more about life and finding freedom and grace in this life for others and helping others. Postmodernism, becoming humble. We do not have to have certainty before we act. Actions out of a sense of certainty often lack the humility that we need to act in love. We take this phrase that is found in Ephesians 4, maybe it's Ephesians 5, I think it's Ephesians 4. Speak the truth in love. And we take it and use it as a hammer. That's wrong. We shouldn't do that. Loving actions are not done to others, but with others. Faith is about other people, not making sure I believe the right things, not that I read the Bible the appropriate amount of time, but doing something that is helping others be more loved. And so this just is a big overview of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and post-modernity. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. We're going to be moving into, I think I'm going to talk about Job and Ecclesiastes first, and then the next Sunday will be a summation. So, Jordan has an announcement.
I'll take care of it.
Okay.